Hello, everyone. I'm Joe Flick with the Montana State Library. I'll just be hosting today. Our speaker, I'm going to turn things directly over to her, is Tracee Abel. And Tracee's with the Department of Revenue, and she's going to kind of walk through some of the changes to tax filing this year and stuff we think that our librarians will find really helpful as you are helping patrons muddle through this tax filing season. So on to you, Tracee.
All right, thank you, Joanne. Again, my name is Tracee Abel from the Montana Department of Revenue. My official title here is the Income Tax Specialist. There are actually two of us that work at the department. And what we do, aside from doing some of the public outreach as far as providing information and training on Montana state income tax information, we also develop the forms, revise those as necessary, maintain the instructions. We also are very involved in the rulemaking process and legislative review during legislative session. Sometimes they make us go over across the street and testify in front of our legislature on some of the state income tax matters. So that's kind of my background and what I do for the department. So I was asked today to kind of provide a kind of an overview that would help all of you out if you receive some questions from taxpayers that come into the library to prepare their returns or find information about that. So I will give kind of a little basic rundown. I'll talk about what's new, which fortunately for 2017 tax purposes and filing purposes isn't really very much. It's kind of the same old, same old. And then I also have some resources that I wanted to share with you, including our new website and our new My Revenue app, which is where you go to find all the forms that you need for whatever you need to file. And we'll kind of do a rundown of how to navigate through that because it is new and a lot of things have moved around. So just getting started, some of the basics on what taxpayers need to know when they want to file an individual income tax return. First of all, not everybody has to file a return. So if you're a resident of Montana and you work here, you have wages, or you earn any sort of income while you're a resident here, you generally have to file a return as long as your income exceeds the standard deduction and exemption amounts provided on the form. So if you're a resident and you make, I have a little chart on this slide, if you're single and you are under 65 and you make more than $4,510, then you do have to file a return. If you make less than that, you don't have to file a return. And so those thresholds are adjusted appropriately depending on your marital situation or your living situation, your filing status. There's also a couple extra exemptions you have to account for if you or your spouse is blind or if you're over 65. So filing a return is the only way to get a refund. So if folks have an employer who withholds taxes from their paycheck and they don't have a filing requirement because they don't meet a threshold, the only way they're going to get that money back is to file a return. So even though they're not necessarily required to file one, if they're due a refund, they're going to have to file one to get that withholding amount back. So the returns are due on April 17th this year because the 15th actually falls on a weekend and the 16th is Emancipation Day, which is observed in Washington, D.C., but for that reason, the Fed returns aren't due until April 17th either, so we follow that deadline. If a taxpayer can't make the filing by April 17th, they do have the ability to file on extension, and the return is due October 15th. For federal purposes, they need to file a request for that extension and send that in before April 17th. But for Montana purposes, the extension is just automatic now. So they don't have to file anything with us as long as they just file by October 15th. They won't receive a late filing penalty. Payments obviously are still due by April 17th. So if they think they're going to owe, they should get that in by April 17th. If they do not, obviously they can, everybody has the choice to pay whenever, but if they pay after April 17th, they may be subject to late payment penalties and interest. And then it's easy to make a payment via our website through our transaction portal or Income Tax Express. So there's a couple options for filing your return. You can file electronically. We have several filing options. We no longer allow you to file the Form 2, the individual income tax return, on our tax transaction portal. If you were familiar with TAP, we discontinued the Form 2 this year. And instead, we partnered with several vendors to provide free filing options. And the one thing that I really want to kind of talk about this, especially with regard to our just our website, is the free file. The Free File Alliance allows you to use a software vendor, and they typically will not charge you for filing the tax return. Excuse me, like that didn't go where I thought it was going to go. But it will. I'll show it to you. Oh, there we are. The Free File Alliance partner offers. Oh, here they are. I just didn't scroll down far enough. So there's these partners allow you to file your tax return for free, but as you notice, some of them have some conditions. So you do have to meet these conditions in order to be able to file your tax return for free. We've received several comments and have probably experienced that some taxpayers are a little bit confused by the limitations that these vendors have in place for free filing. And so the one thing important is, like, before you choose which software that you're going to use, make sure that you meet the qualifications. Some of them are a little bit more lenient, some of them are a little bit more strict. As you can see, some have special offers for military personnel that they don't necessarily offer for non-military taxpayers. Personally, I used H&R Block this year, which probably tells you a lot about myself, but but to me it didn't have as many restrictions, and I met the qualifications pretty easily, and I found that it was actually fairly easy to use, a little bit easier to use than TurboTax, which I've used in the past. But I didn't meet the qualifications for TurboTax, and so I didn't use them this year. But those are all of the offers that we have available. Again, it's really important that taxpayers understand that you do have to meet those qualifications in order to file for free using one of these vendors.
Why are there age restrictions?
I think that that they just want to provide certain. I think it has to do with how easy your taxes are. You know what I mean? Because once, like, if you have a business, none of these are going to be, very few of these are going to be very free for you. For example, if you have a 1099, TurboTax wants to fill out a Schedule C, and it'll charge you to do that, whereas H&R Block may not, if your adjusted gross income is still less than 66,000. And I think it also depends on just the complexity of your taxes. So I don't know. I don't know why they've come up with these restrictions. These weren't set by the department. These are all a part of each individual software vendor kind of came up with these on their own. So I noticed that some of them don't have offers for people over a certain age. So I'm not really sure why that is, but and maybe they don't get a lot of traffic from people filing on their own. Maybe I have no idea. So okay. So the Free File Alliance is different than MontanaFreeFile.org. MontanaFreeFile.org just lists some other resources for people. A lot of it will, some of them, like this provides information for volunteer sites, and things like that. You can go here if you want to be a volunteer or if you need to find a site. It has, you know, different spots for your area. And
so this would be a good place for Montana libraries to find volunteers in their community to refer people to, would be the Montana Free File.
Correct. Yes.
Great.
And so those are, you know, those are two resources. The Free File Alliance page should not be confused with the approved vendor page, which I'll show you later on our, well, I guess I can show you now because I have a link to it. But if you don't qualify for the Free File program, these are the approved vendors that you can choose from if you have to pay. So you can kind of shop around and see who gives you the best deal. But all of these software vendors were approved by the Department of Revenue. If they're not on this list, then they did not go through our approval process. And basically that approval process does two things. One, it makes sure that we can receive the information through the electronic file, that just whatever you submit is what comes to us, because obviously you don't want that to be different. You want it to be right in what you submitted. So that's the first test. And then for a lot of them, we do test the accuracy of their software to make sure it's calculating things correctly. However, we don't test everything. Some things they just they take on their own to determine how it's supposed to be done based on their interpretation of our rules and laws. So where it's important, we try to set them straight, but we don't have total control over that. And we don't always have a way to test everything either. We can't always test how they came up with a number that was submitted on the return. So it's important to remember.
Before we move on, I just wanted to point out that one of our viewers here today, one of our library directors, pointed out that the 1040 Now Alliance partner has a limit of 3 computers, or three tax returns submitted per computer, and that could be a real problem for a public library that might have more than 3 patrons walking in. So just to keep aware of that, that's a limitation that might affect when that payment for their assistance kicks in.
That's good information. Well, that doesn't help. That doesn't help.
Yeah,
that doesn't help you all at all.
Luckily, there are other ones there, and you know, if somebody comes in, we can just point out that we've, you know, this library. I'm assuming when they say computer, they might be talking about an individual network. So it could be just 3, even if you have 6 computers in your library. So it's just something to keep an eye on, and maybe they're not a good choice for people filing in the library.
Okay, so the last thing on this slide, the Montana Elderly Homeowner Renter Credit, you can actually file this form by itself on our transaction portal. Not every person who qualifies to file for this credit has to file an income tax return. So it can be a separate filing all by itself. And so it is available to file electronically through TAP. And then you can also file on paper. Obviously, we discourage paper as much as possible, just because it takes longer to process, and we like e-filing, but you can still do it, of course. And so all of our paper returns are found on My Revenue, which I will show you in a little bit. And there are 2 mailing addresses that you would mail your paper return. There's an address if you have a refund due or you don't owe any money, and then if you do owe some taxes, there's an address to send returns with a payment there. So choosing the right form, there's 2 individual income tax forms. The most common form that anyone can fill out is Form 2, the long form. But if you can answer yes to all of these questions on the slide in front of you, then the person could qualify for the short form, which is just a little bit easier and more straightforward to fill out. It doesn't take as long. You don't have to sort through all the schedules and instructions to find what you're looking for. It's just pretty easy. And so, like I said, the elderly homeowner renter credit can be filed on its own if you don't have a filing requirement to file an individual income tax return. And then the form ETM is for enrolled tribal members who have exempt income. So this also can be filed on its own if a tribal member qualifies or if their income is all exempt, then they don't have to file an individual income tax return, but they would need to file this form to tell us, the income that they earned and show that it was exempt. If they do have other income that's not exempt, then they would have, and it does meet the threshold for filing an individual income tax return, then they would just include Form ETM with that individual income tax return to again report any of the income that is non-exempt. And there are some qualifications for being exempt. In general, the income that is exempt is income that is earned by a tribal member who is living on a reservation of which they are an enrolled member. And the income that they earned was earned on the reservation. So it's pretty specific, but the instructions kind of tell you that those qualifications. So if someone is working off of the reservation in which they're an enrolled member, that income is not exempt. If they are living on a different reservation from where they're an enrolled member, that income earned while they're living there is not exempt. So they do have to meet some qualifications in order for that income to be exempt. And so to qualify for the elderly homeowner renter credit, the taxpayer has to be over the age, it has to be 62 or older. They have to be a Montana resident and own or rent a place for a total of 6 months or more during the year. But they have to have lived in Montana for 9 months. So what that means is they could have rented or owned 2 different places in the year, as long as they owned or rented one of their primary residence for 6 months or more, that's fine. But they still have to have lived in Montana for a total of 9 months. So I'm trying to explain that in a different way. So if they lived in one place from January to say June 30th, they would qualify for the credit even though they might have lived in another place the other half of the year. Or if they just moved here and they lived in one place for 3 months and then moved to another place and lived there for 6 months or more, then they would still qualify. But if they lived here for 9 months and lived in one place for 4.5 months and the other place for 4.5 months, they wouldn't qualify for the credit. Oops, I did not mean to do that. They also, once they start to exceed $45,000, they aren't eligible for the credit, and the credit is reduced below 1,000, starting with, I think it's like $35,000. If they make over $35,000, the credit starts to be excluded portion of it. So there's a lot of different factors there. So any property that a taxpayer owns or rents pretty much qualifies, unless they rent from, if the property they rent is not paying property taxes, then they don't qualify for the credit. This credit is actually, it's a property tax assistance program that is administered through the income tax process. And so if you are living in a place that doesn't pay property tax, then the portion of your rent isn't going towards property tax. There's no property tax relief. So in essence, you do have to be in some way, directly or indirectly, paying property taxes in order to qualify for this credit. Now, of course, the legislature came along and put in a rule that if you live in a county or municipal housing authority, you can still claim the credit, even though they aren't necessarily subject to property taxes. And new for 2017, with regard to the elderly homeowner renter credit, residents of a long-term care facility that are not exempt from property taxes can use a new method for determining the amount of rent to report. So this is important because, they usually in a long-term care facility, you pay a lump sum that takes care of not only your housing, but also your housekeeping, your food, meals, perhaps some medical care, memory care, other things like that. So they don't always get a breakdown of what is actually available for their housing portion, which would be their rent. And so there's a new method for determining that. And you can find that information on the Form 2 EC. I wouldn't expect you to I don't know if you ever help folks with those types of forms, but the instructions are pretty clear, so I'm not sure I need to go through that specifically here. And again, you can file that form electronically on our transaction portal. So the most important tip for folks is that before you start your Montana income tax return, you need to complete your federal income tax return. And so the IRS provides some good information about how to do that. They've revamped their website. I've noticed it's a little bit more straightforward. A lot of the information has been written more in plain language under the plain language guidelines, and so that's the website there. If you did not have to file a federal return because you don't meet their income thresholds for filing a return, which are actually higher than our thresholds, then you do have to basically pretend to fill out a federal return so that you can complete your Montana income tax return. So you don't necessarily get out of it entirely. So some basic steps for figuring out your Montana taxes. Our booklet is full of more detailed instructions, but in general, for people who need a rough estimate of how much they could expect to owe, they can follow these steps. Again, you have to have your federal adjusted gross income information, which is found by filing your federal return or preparing your federal return. And then once you've copied that over, you figure out which Montana additions apply to you. These are Montana specific items that are taxable in Montana. And then step 3, there are certain items that are not taxable in Montana that might be taxable for federal purposes, but are not taxable for Montana purposes. Then you would subtract those. And then step 4, sorry, not second, step 4, you'd subtract your deduction. So you, like the federal system, you can either itemize your deductions or you can take the standard deduction. Montana has its own standard deduction, so it's different than the federal deduction. And Montana mostly follows and allows for the same itemized deductions as federal, but there are a couple exceptions, things that we don't allow. Like we don't allow you to deduct state and local taxes, and we do allow you to deduct a certain amount of your federal taxes that you paid, and the child and dependent care deduction is also on the itemized schedule. So there's a couple exceptions, but for the most part, it's mostly the same things that you would be able to itemize federally. And then step 5, you figure out your exemptions. So depending on, if you're married or you have children, you might have 1 to 4 or more exemptions. And so you'd figure out what that is and subtract that. And that's how you get to your Montana taxable income. And then you figure out what your tax is based on the tax rate table, multiply that. And then once you figure out what your tax is, then you can figure out if you qualify for any credits. And you would apply any credits that you can't carry over first, and then any credits that you can carry over or second, and then any refundable credits are applied last. And that's how you get to what you are due as a refund or what you owe. Just kind of talking about the additions and subtractions. When I'm filing, I have a very basic tax situation. So, and I'm pretty savvy on what applies to me and what doesn't. But I still always feel really overwhelmed when I'm looking at the list of things to determine if they apply to me or not. But what I did find is that most software companies, there's always like a little "what's this" box when you're filing your return, and you can click on it and it gives you a pretty good description, so you can decide if it applies to you. I'd say that most of the things that are on that you have to add back or subtract from Montana for determining Montana taxable income pretty much don't apply to very many people. So if it doesn't sound, my rule of thumb is if it didn't sound familiar to you, it probably doesn't apply to you. So the one thing that is changed for 2017 is the medical expense limitation if you itemize your deductions. The limitation, you used to only be able to deduct the amount of medical expense that exceeded 10% of your Montana adjusted gross income. But now you can deduct anything that exceeds 7.5%. So that limitation went down, which means that you can potentially deduct more medical expense than you might have been able to previously. So I have a little example here. If your Montana adjusted gross income is 40,000 and you itemize deductions, you can only deduct anything that's over 7.5% of that amount. So 7.5% of 40,000 is 3,000. So if your medical expenses exceed 3,000, you can deduct the difference. So if your medical expenses are 4,500, you apply the limitation, the deductible amount is 1,500. And that's really the only thing that's changed for 2017. There's a lot of stuff that happened in the tax reform bill. Most of that doesn't apply until 2018, so we don't have to worry about it on the 2017 return. But they did retroactively change this limitation for 2017. So that's the only thing that's really changed. Another thing that it changed, but it didn't change, if that makes sense. The Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018, so the budget bill that Congress passed in February after a short shutdown. They actually brought back some deductions that had previously expired. In the original tax reform bill, they were not bringing back the tuition and fees deduction or the mortgage insurance premium deduction. Those had expired at the end of 2016. And so both the Fed, the IRS, and ourselves, the Montana Department of Revenue, had taken those lines off the form. And then they threw them back in to the budget bill and made it retroactive to 2017. So we all had to hurry up and put them back on the form. So like I said, they went away, but they didn't go away, but sort of went away for a minute and then just came back. So, but as far as everyone's concerned, anyone who hasn't filed yet shouldn't have any, wouldn't necessarily have any questions about that. They should hopefully be in the software packages by now. But if they are not and people ask about it, I mean, hopefully all the software packages have updated that information, but it's possible that it could be still missing from some. So if you run into any folks that would otherwise know that they'd be allowed those deductions but can't figure out how to file it on the form, they may just need to wait a little bit, or maybe somebody needs to contact the software vendors to make sure that they have the things updated. If anyone has purchased, I mean, if you get this question, if anyone has purchased a software package through the store that you would load onto your computer, then you need to make sure that they run the updates to make sure that they have the most updated version of the software. So I imagine that anything that's sitting on a shelf right now is probably not updated, but you'd have to just run a quick update to download those updates online if that's necessary. So, yeah. So some of our taxpayer resources. So this is our new My Revenue site, and I will go ahead and just open this up. So if you're looking for a form, this is where you go. And there are 3 ways to search for forms. You can just type in a keyword and search that way. I can't promise that what you want will immediately come up as the first choice, obviously, but it should take you to the right place. So this this actually takes you to the Form 2EZ, and then the long Form 2 is a little bit farther down the list. So you can search many different avenues depending on if you know. You kind of have to know what you're looking for in order to use this, but if you know what you're looking for, this is probably the fastest way to find the form. So if you know the name of the form or the number, it can take you to that. So once you, the second way is to just go to the directory, which is an alphabetical list of all of our forms here. So again, if you know what you're looking for, you can just scroll down to the right thing. If you're not quite sure what you're looking for, you can use these filters. Oops. So you just turn them on and off depending on what you're looking for. So you can find the individual. See, like I just did this, but that filter doesn't make sense because the Form 2 should also be listed there. So you can use those. I'm not a huge fan right now of this directory. I think it needs some work. Again, it's new, but you can also search here if you need to, and it'll pull them up as you start typing, so it kind of helps there.
That worked just fine. There's Form 2 right up there.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to tell my office mate to be quiet. He's got a phone call and he started making noise.
Just have a little bit of background noise. We can't really like pick it out or anything. I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay. And so then the third option, and I think this is still being worked on a little bit, but this is more of a guided search here under getting started. And so I think this was built based on some of the most popular like search criteria so far. So as we've had this tool out for the last year, they've kind of revamped this a little bit to be designed towards what people were looking for the most when they use this part of the tool. So if you need to file an individual income tax return, but you're not really sure what you need to file, or you do know, you can just select it and get right to it. Ta-da. But if you don't know, then you can answer a few more questions, and here it is for you. So I'm not, again, I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of the guided search right now because I'm not sure it's as intuitive as they'd like it to be, but it's sometimes can be a quick way to get to what you need really quickly for folks. So, I mean, we used to have a making a payment button here, but I'm not sure where that went. So if you need to find an estimated tax form, it's probably best to just search it or look through the directory. So I'm going to go to the Form 2 here, so you can see what the landing. So everything is, all the forms are on a landing page now. If you notice, so this one is the landing page for, this is actually the forms and instructions. So this is the instruction booklet, which does include the paper form, and the paper form here is fillable. So you can download it, you can fill in the form that's provided with this. But if you need other forms, so if you need the 2EC, there's a quick leap that you can take there. If you need a previous year, you can find all the previous years on this landing page for the booklet. So if you just want to download Form 2 all by itself, you just follow the quick link. Again, you have the previous years, the related forms, so this would take you back to the booklet, and all of the schedules are separate from the actual form. I mean, they'll all be in the booklet, but if you just want to download the ones you need, there's quick links to those schedules in particular that you need as well. And if you owe taxes, there's a quick link to the payment voucher. So, I mean, the idea was kind of like you can get to one place, but then also if you need to go somewhere else, there's some quick access there, so you don't have to go all the way back out to the beginning to find it again. And that's pretty, the credit forms, you kind of have to find most of them individually. So if you know, if you're going through the instruction booklet and you say, hey, I'm qualified for this credit and I have to fill out a form, like you just find the form name and you should be able to find it. So I type in adoption credit. Oh, there's no form for that. That's right. It's like, that wasn't a good example. So yeah. So again, they all have the previous years and they have forms that they relate to. There's also a little bit more information here about the credit. It gives you a little bit more description about if you can determine if you qualify for the credit in advance before you even download the form. And that's the My Revenue app and the form search app in a little nutshell. Does anybody have any questions about that so far?
I haven't seen any questions come in, but
Okay.
I'm also really curious about if anyone can share with me what kinds of tax filing assistance do you find your patrons need? What are they looking for when they come into your library? That'd be interesting to know. Maybe we'll give folks a minute to
Sure.
think about that and post before, and then what we can go. Are you are we ready to just kind of stop the recording, or
No, I have a few more
you have more?
resources I'll share.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, sorry.
Stay on.
Let's see. So this is our new website. It's been totally revised. If you remember what it looked like last year, it's a new website application, I guess you could say. I'm not savvy on all that lingo, so I apologize. So this is our landing page. Hopefully there's some quick links that people can file or can click to if they need. Again, if you want to find forms, you click here and it will take you to where you can click to My Revenue. If you click on forms over on here, it will take you right to My Revenue so that you can search the forms. But in general, if you go to the click on anything, it should take you to a landing page. For people who are not sure about what information they need, we have the thing that individuals will use the most is you find individual income tax under taxes and fees here, and then if you're a business filer or if you're an individual filer, you can kind of go that way. There's also every tax that we administer here. There's a lot of miscellaneous taxes that apply mostly to businesses. So for individuals, though, you would click here. And so there's just this landing page with a plethora of topics. So you can kind of scroll down and see if any of them apply to the question that you have in your mind. And so you can tell we have specific pages for military personnel and their spouses. They have specific requirements and rules or exceptions. Again, you'd find information for Native American filers here, refunds, changing your address if you're a non-filer, making payments. So you can kind of, scroll through and see if anything applies to you. But if you already kind of know, like, oh, I want to know this, this is like a filter up here. So it will, instead of having to scroll through the large group of boxes, you can just kind of go through things. So depending on what you're looking for. And let's see, what else is here? Another resource that that we have is we have this calendar, which would tell you some important dates coming up. You can look at the whole calendar to see what's going on. Everything that's due ever to the department should be on this calendar. Property tax payments, well, no, county, I think counties do that, but certain property tax reporting, personal property tax reporting, any miscellaneous taxes, withholding reports, income taxes due, estimated payments if they're due. You can see when they're due. We also have, as a resource, which I encourage everyone to sign up for, the tax news you can use. So you can sign up, subscribe to our newsletter, and this is kind of the avenue that we provide mostly to tax professionals, like what's new, anything that we feel like they need to know to help taxpayers with preparing returns or just anything new in general. But you don't have to be a tax professional to benefit from the information, and a lot of the information can be benefited from by anyone. But this is an example of what that looks like when you receive it in your email. So most of them are, they're little tidbits, and then the actual article is on the website somewhere. And the reason for that is because you can use, if you're not sure what you're looking for, you can use the search box, and it will hopefully pull up anything related to that. So if there's news related to that item, the news will pop up. If there's a page about that information, that page will be available. Anything related to your search topic will pop up here, and so like I was loosely searching for the elderly homeowner renter credit, and you can see we have a lot of information about that credit or pertaining to that credit here. So it's kind of nice that all the results from our website will pop up in that search function. So also, yeah. So that's our new website. I think that also is new, but we're still kind of working through the kinks of it. So if you have difficulty finding anything on our website, we definitely want to know. And so feel free to email us to let us know about what we can do to improve our website. If you have our Get Help tab over here, so you can call us, you can email us, whatever you need to, however you want to reach us. We are always here. Let's see. So the IRS website's also a really good resource. Like I said, they've reformatted their website to be a little bit more user-friendly, straightforward. I've used it recently just to kind of click around. They still have a lot of information that you sort of have to sort through, but it's in, like I said, it's a lot easier to read. They increase the size of the font. I think they're doing a better job of explaining things in shorter sentences that are understandable. So so you can use that as a resource as well. And then all the different ways you can reach us. You can view us, view information on the website. You can call us. Our call center hours are Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And the taxpayer helpline is just our local Helena number. But like I said, you can call us for any time between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. We do have people who will help you live. We don't use a phone tree. If we have a high volume of calls, you might have to wait on hold, but you're waiting on hold for an actual person to talk to. And if they can't answer your question, they will forward you to someone who can. And if you don't want to wait online, or if you don't want to call, you can also email our customer assistants, and they will forward your question on to the appropriate person to answer that. And we usually respond to those within 24 hours. So you usually get I think myself, if I get an email through that system, I'm trying to answer it before I go home for the day. So it's usually within 24 hours. And I think that is all that I have for now. And so I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has any, but other than that, I shall conclude.
Thank you, Tracee. A couple of comments. I did ask our librarians online what kinds of taxpayer assistance they are asked for this time of year by their patrons, and they're hearing a lot of people are coming in to get forms, and now they have to print out forms. Libraries do charge a printing a fee to print things out, so people are not happy about having to pay for that. Just information for you to maybe share. And it seems like there were several people who said that paying for the forms and paying to print out the booklets has not been very popular among their patrons, not surprisingly. And then Kelly McGregor was saying that I'm trying to remember which library you're from, Kelly. You said that right at the beginning. Belgrade. So she's saying that they have volunteer tax preparers at their library that visit for a few days in February and March, and they've been working with Rural Dynamics on that for several years, and the library sets up appointments for them. So that's how they're handling tax preparation help at their library, which is kind of cool. And that goes back to some of the resources you shared at the beginning of our session on where to find perhaps volunteers, trained volunteers in the community or nearby that might be willing to do something like what Kelly's doing in Belgrade.
Right. Yeah. There are several sites. The AARP has a lot of volunteers, and they have sites in, I think, almost pretty much every major city in Montana and some of the rural areas as well. And I think if you visit the AARP website, they also have a tool for finding the volunteer assistance sites to use. And I want to say, I could be wrong and I'm just going to make it up, but I want to say the IRS might also have some ways to find that, because I know that we have an IRS liaison that that works with those volunteer sites. I think every region has a person, so they might actually have some information about where to find those sites as well. And this, I forgot to kind of share this, but I shared it we shared it through the link on the through the meeting. But this is the guide that we provide to the volunteers, and it's a little less cumbersome than the instruction booklet. It really kind of just drills down on, here's some, taxes in Montana in general. Here's the additions, here's the subtractions. There's a lot of focus on the 2EC in there. There's even an example about how to fill out the form, and more extensive rules. But it's more basic because it's really geared for those that have the simpler situations that the volunteers will help out with. But it does have it has a lot of focus on retirement income, pension exemptions, things like that, with a few examples that they use this guide to kind of train new folks, and just sort of as a resource for the folks that have been doing the taxes for a while. So they like it. And one thing I should point out is, if you have the electronic version, the table of contents here is interactive. So if you have a topic that you want to just skip to, you can just do that. So it's kind of nice. That's not a feature they put into our booklet, so
they should. But that's what we have listed as the AARP VITA booklet in your materials section. And I also want to point out that Marjorie was sharing that over in Missoula, the public library they do a bookmark that they can hand to folks this time of year that tells them where they can get help with tax filing, free help throughout the community. They don't host anything specifically, but they make that, they gather up that information and share it with patrons. So that's a great idea too. I think with just the not being able to go to the post office and pick up your forms this year is a big adjustment for a lot of people who are just used to doing it that way. So one of the reasons that the state librarian wanted us to do this webinar, Tracee, was because she really felt like that would be a watershed moment, and libraries need to be prepared. And I think it looks like they're already seeing folks coming through the door. So I'm sure the post office is saying, "Oh, go to the library. They can, maybe they have them." And
well, we hope that we announced it enough. We put out several public service announcements and tried to advertise the fact that we weren't going to be publishing booklets as much as we could. And I really can't I can't say that they will ever come back at this point. Just because unless something changes with the budget that allows us to do that. The one nice thing about not having the printed booklets is especially this year with all the changes that were in and out, because we have our forms pretty much well designed by June or July. We're a lot more flexible in updating the stuff online when something changes that we didn't know about in advance. So like all this tax reform stuff and all the things that were made retroactive, your paper booklet would never have that information. So so it's nice that we have more freedom to make last minute changes when needed to the electronic version of the instructions and forms.
Well, Nancy down at Bitterroot Public Library is saying that they printed out some instruction booklets and made them available for 2-week checkout, so people can borrow them with their library card for free. And they don't charge for copies at that library. Not that that means that everybody should run to the Bitterroot Library to get their tax forms, but I do think it's something that libraries, every library has to make that decision on their own. But the idea of maybe having some copies that you make available for checkout, that might be a way to assist patrons, because printing out the entire booklet is going to be expensive. And Starla over in Hot Springs is saying we print the forms for free, but not the booklet. But they keep the instruction booklets on a thumb drive, and so they have them available for people to plug into a computer and take a look at them, or they can download them to their personal computer. Of course, they could do that on the Wi-Fi too. So there's some ways around it. We're all adjusting. I do want to thank you for taking that time. And I don't see any other questions. I think people are just kind of sharing ideas about what they're doing at the library. And that always gives it's always a great thing when I see that happening in our chat box. So
yeah.
Good for getting that all started, getting the conversation going.
Sure. And I will add one more thing, like that if someone really does need a paper form, if they call us and request it, we can accommodate that request. All that means is we're just going to print it out on our printer and mail it off. So if they need those forms, we can do that. Obviously, we are trying not to encourage that, but it also it does give us an idea of who needs paper forms to determine whether or not, it's worth bringing the booklet back. As we see more and more e-filed returns, especially using software, it just becomes less and less necessary. So we still will. We'll still mail you a form if you want to request it. You just have to wait for it. That's all. Just however long the mail takes to get to you.
So that's something, if you have a patron who objects to paying the library for a printed copy of a form, you can let them know that they can request that form directly from the Department of Revenue and that they'll mail it to them. So that at least lets the library off the hook. There's one comment or question here for you. And do you expect the elimination of filing via TAP to increase the number of paper returns filed?
That's a good question. I don't know. I would expect that some folks may file paper returns. I think that a lot of the reason that a lot of people used TAP in the first place was just because the software companies didn't offer a free state filing. So now that there are more options to file for your state for free, I'm not sure that will that might not make as much of a difference. I was an avid TAP user myself because I refused to pay TurboTax $36 to file my my individual state return when all I had to report was a couple things. So so TAP was an easy option for me. But now that I qualify for the free state filing, it's a lot easier for me to because the software will do it for you all together. You've already input, you don't have to re-input a lot of information again. So it's actually easier if you qualify for the free file to file your state return electronically than to file for free federally and then take that and go file on TAP. So I'm not sure it will. Like I said, it was the only free option for a long time, but now it's not. So I don't know if it'll increase that much. That much. It also costs a lot to maintain those returns on TAP and to put them on there. That with more e-file, more people e-filing
with a vendor, e-filing with a vendor, yeah.
The cost benefit to maintaining that system just sort of started to dwindle.
Public-private partnerships, that's what we're all about these days in state government. Yes. So I want to thank you again, and I'm going to go ahead and end our recording today. So if you are watching the recording, be sure to check the description because there'll be the links there for the various items that we've mentioned that throughout the presentation today. So you can just click on those and find them, including that nice AARP VITA booklet, which is a nice reference guide. So thanks again, Tracee. I really appreciate your time and for answering all these questions. So really appreciate it. Thank you.
But you're certainly very welcome. Thank you for having me.